kingfishers. And for sheer brilliance of colour, what other British bird can match them? Early March, and excavations are already underway to make a secret chamber in which to lay their eggs 2 feet down a hole, deep into the river bank. Confident that their liquid acre is well stocked with minnow, stickleback and gudgeon, they have already paired and flown high in courtship flight, and are now hammering out a new nest. Beaks are powerful tools for tunnelling and are driven in hard, spearing and stabbing. The nest hole is sited near the top of the overhanging bank, hopefully above flood level should the river rise. Specially adapted feet rake up the dirt and sweep it outside. The cockbird, recognizable by his all-black beak, is excited, impatient, and eager to mate, and offers the prenuptial fish. Will she accept? No. The nesting chamber is not yet ready, so it's back to the digging. Oh well, a pity to waste it. The cock needs energy too, for even sharing the work, the tunnelling will take about 5 days. The hen's lower bill is rose-coloured. Instinctively, she will know the right moment to accept his present. Her mate, like the male of most species, just has to be patient and persevere. But the evidence outside shows that the excavations inside must be nearing completion. Under the cock's compelling gaze, this fish is taken, but surprisingly the hen turns it. Has he in his urgency confused her? What should she do now? Give it back? No, he won't take it back, so uncharacteristically and a trifle uncomfortably, she swallows it, tail first. Observe, dive, grab. With eyes closed and a mere 1/3 of a second underwater, there's a 1 in 3 catch rate. But this one got away. Well, nearly. The hen refuses to be hurried into mating and requires more courting with yet another fish, beaten senseless and presented to her head first, ready for easy swallowing. The giving of fish is not just ritual, but provides the hen with the essential calcium and protein she needs to make the eggs. When she is ready, the birds will mate several times each day, and each day an egg will be laid on the bare earth of the secret chamber. The cock steadies himself by firmly holding her crown feathers. Feather care is essential for a bird that dives underwater, cleaning, maintaining and waterproofing the beautiful plumage. Down the hole, safe from predators, the incubation is shared, each bird spending up to 3 hours on the eggs during the day, with the hen sitting at night. 3 weeks of waiting. New life everywhere, and at last the telltale sign that the kingfishers too have hatched. pathetically vulnerable. The head heavy, with the huge blind eyeballs, and on the tip of the beak, the egg tooth, used for breaking through the shell. Each newborn chick needs 3 times its weight in fish a day. Small whole fish are fed, but now even regurgitated fragments tempt a hungry, helpless one. There is no cosy nest lining. The parent birds take it in turns to brood their naked offspring, transferring heat and keeping them warm and snug. Fish are brought frequently and fed to the hungriest chick first. All are presented head foremost. Sticklebacks are beaten against the perch before being brought in to flatten the prickly spines. Minnows nipped behind the gills to immobilize them, and the bullhead's big head is pulped, relaxing and flattening the large fins so as not to choke the babies. The hen is just about ready for a fish break too, leaving a tangle of pink flesh. Hidden underground, the defenseless young are safer from enemies, such as rats or stoats. This hole will be home for the next 25 days. Spacious now, but becoming more cramped as the nestlings grow. Within a week, these youngsters will be taking fish almost as big as those their parents eat. Seen as competitors by trout fishermen, kingfishers were once persecuted and slaughtered mercilessly, their feathers being used, ironically, for fishing flies to lure trout. Now it is illegal to trap or destroy these lovely birds. An unnetted trout hatchery is a kingfisher's supermarket. But some kingfishers aren't so lucky and have to be satisfied with window shopping. A garden pool comes under attack. But it's the undercover story here too. Nothing has been left to chance. And the treasure of gold is protected by stone-faced security guards that seem to mock the kingfisher. They are definitely not to his taste. But this is, and it's trout. Oh well, it's a tough life fishing for yourself, plus 7 other ever-gaping beaks. And sometimes fish are in short supply, killed by agricultural or industrial pollution. Then there are the chemical weed killers which can slowly harm fish, and ultimately young birds too. At 8 days, these birds are growing fast. It's all systems go. Hearing the call, as the cock returns with fish, the hungriest babies face down the tunnel, pushing the sleepy, contented ones to the back of the nest. The chicks still need brooding to keep them warm, but their feather quills are forming, showing as dark spikes through the skin. And the reptilian link with distant ancestors is evident too. Pellets of fish bones, thrown up by the parents and young, are spread and then trodden onto the floor of the hole, under and around the babies, where they accumulate, giving rise to the old fallacy that kingfishers deliberately construct a nest of fish bones before they lay their eggs. Fish scales on a branch, or the undigested fish bones dropped on the water weeds, are sometimes the only clues to the kingfisher's presence. At 14 days, the young offspring in their coats of quill are comic characters, like punk knights in armour. Feathers remain sheathed, protecting them from the debris of fish bones and refuse. The young are caricatures of their beautiful parents, who now catch 30 or more fish a day for them, diving till dusk. In their spiky jackets, this up-and-coming bird group sing their latest release. And the din made in the nest may be clearly heard for some distance outside. The perched kingfisher watches the water vole before diving for fish. Even slowed down 20 times, the kingfisher flashes, missile-like, towards its prey. Kingfishers keep an eye on strangers in their territory, and hovering humans are spotted at once. Are we as aware of kingfishers and of their needs? Bank clearance and dredging along a river can totally remove essential perches and nesting sites, so necessary for the bird's survival. But here, the demand for building materials has created a flooded gravel pit, which man will restore for himself and birds. These wide expanses of water can thus provide new sites for kingfishers, as well as a variety of leisure opportunities for man. Canals are also man-made, and despite the traffic, some kingfishers will nest along them and fish from their banks, though discarded fishing lines and hooks have proved lethal to some birds. But anglers do have their uses, and the best view. And some birds are more distracting than others. Oiling up comes expensive from a bottle, but the real birds have their own oil gland for preening. Kingfishers pair for life and defend their territory vigorously. A sudden takeover bid during the breeding season calls for aggressive posturing, and rivals have to be seen off. On opposite perches, kingfishers wait for the right moment to fire themselves at their rivals, hoping to catch them off balance. For the aim, if at all possible, is to knock the opponent from his perch and down into the water. Each pair of kingfishers requires a certain minimum length of river in which to fish and raise their young, so there is only enough room for a fixed number of territories. Competition for the prime sites is fierce. Those birds really fighting fit retain or take over the fishing grounds. Those that lose are ousted, banished to less exclusive fishing. The breeding instinct is strong, and even before his first brood have left the nest, the cock starts burrowing a new hole ready for his second family. Most pairs attempt to breed twice in a season. At 21 days, the kingfishers have shed their quills and are now full-feathered. At last there is the promise of the bluebird beauty to come. Now most of their time is spent preening and stretching their wings. Only a few more days of home comforts. For any morning now, at the first glimmer of dawn, they will have left the nest of their own accord. The tunnel is now so slippery that the birds tumble out backwards and straight into the stream to bathe. Newly fledged kingfishers are less colourful than their parents, having shorter black beaks and black feet. They bob and chirp to attract their parents' attention and scatter along the stream in twos and threes. But their latent, aggressive, territorial behaviour will soon become apparent, and the squabbles will begin. Occasionally, a parent bird fails to recognise its own offspring and behaves as if the young are intruders into the territory. This is a frightening moment. The hen is still trying to drive them off, but instinctively the young sit tight and hungrily demand to be fed. Fortunately, the mistake is soon realized. They will be fed for 2 or 3 days if the parents can find them, but will have to learn quickly to fend for themselves if they're to survive. In fact, only about 1/4 of all the young will live to breed, but such losses are quite normal in nature. The new experience of roosting and the chill of a first night in the open. Cats are predators, although most creatures find the flesh of kingfishers unpalatable. Inexperienced kingfishers drown in the whirlpools by the mill. They dive too often with damp feathers, which then become waterlogged, and they sink. They get caught in weeds. A fledgling may dive 20 times before it makes a catch. Death may be from starvation, sheer exhaustion and cold. Learning to fish and where is vital. Birds are also killed crossing the roads, and it's even on record that one young kingfisher, desperate for fish, drowned in a jar of tiddlers on the river bank. good fishing grounds are highly sought after. And there's nothing like advertising ownership. On the river, everyone wants a stretch of their own, with fishing rights strictly preserved. Bullhead bashing is in a class of its own. And unlike trout, the competition for bullheads is strictly between feathered fishers. There's a lot to learn, but already the art of fishing on the main river has been mastered. Summer heat, the fragrance of flowers, and kingfishers scan the shallows. Camouflaged till something disturbs them, they spot each other and sway their squat bodies, pushing their beaks forward to intimidate. August and September are critical months for inexperienced juveniles. They are driven out by long-established pairs from one territory after another. The survivors tend to move on downstream, and if challenged whilst fishing, become very aggressive. Many make their way to warmer climes, the salt marshes, estuaries and harbours, ready for winter. Historically, kingfishers are regarded as a symbol of peace and serenity. In classical mythology, the kingfisher, named Halcyon, nested on the open seas, quelling the waves till the eggs hatched. Hence the term halcyon days. The kingfisher looks strangely out of place amongst the seaweed, plunging in the rock pools for prawns and fish, the gorgeous plumage changing with the light and shade. According to legend, it was a grey bird when released by Noah from the ark, but flying high to the west, its breast was scorched by the setting sun, and its back took on the curious colours of the evening sky. Now the last embers of warmth and sun fade, as in mid-November, the little summer of St. Martin draws to an end. And St. Martin's bird, so conspicuous at this time, faces the rigours of winter. Nature is ruthless. The survival of the fittest is the rule, and the wind blows cold. To make a catch, the kingfisher needs clear water. Fish become invisible in swirling, murky floods. Even the sea has been known to freeze over in hard winters. And a larder frozen underwater can mean death for many kingfishers. After one severe winter, the population along a river bank was reduced from one pair every 1.5 miles to one pair every 20 miles. Fortunately, kingfishers are resilient and recover quickly from heavy losses. But even exotic feathers cannot prevent a bird freezing to death when weakened by starvation. But soon the tentacles of winter will lose their grip. Young kingfishers will blossom into the rich plumage of maturity and return upstream to mate and breed. And when you glimpse a kingfisher, Tennyson's secret splendour of the brooks, as a blue dart above the stream, remember the bird's birth underground and its brilliance underwater, for these are the real secrets, the spectacle and splendour of the brooks.
Migrating swallows dance above the sun-drenched waters of a reed-laced world. Reed beds work in a fascinating way, their beauty enhanced by the quality and rarity of the inhabitants. In Britain, breeding Marsh Harriers cling to a reed-bed existence. And the bittern occasionally emerges from its secret world. For all of the year, this chameleon-like place, unstable in so many ways, is wrapped in seasonal splendor. Early morning, a water rail looks for food in the marginal cresses of a shallow pool. Here sticklebacks live, a favorite delicacy. The rail will later retreat to the dense forest of reeds, unseen but identified by its screaming call. At their edge, the reed beds are most vulnerable. They could be considered their own worst enemy. Allowing trees to take over ground, they've struggled hard to win. Initially, they find a foothold in shallow water, where few other plants could survive. Then, by multiplying through an intricate root system, they spread quickly around the edges of deep lagoons, pools, and rivers. The stems that grow from the submerged roots die back each year. In time, a damp mass of decaying reeds and clogged roots rises above the water level and begins to dry out. New plants can now move in. Early settlers include alder, sallow, and buckthorn. If the area remains dry for long enough, birch and hawthorn follow. Years later, the whole reed bed may have been replaced by a stand of oak woodland. In spite of its botanical transience, the scrub-infested edge of a reed bed forms a vital habitat for breeding birds. The grasshopper warbler, newly arrived from Africa, sprays a ratchet call across its territory. A resident male Chetty's warbler announces his intention to acquire property. The reed warbler has arrived, and although it will feed in the scrub, it comes as a new neighbor for the bearded tit, one of the few birds actually locked into a reed bed existence throughout the year. The varied song of the sedge warbler announces its arrival for the northern summer. Warm days of late spring encourage the splendor of flowering hawthorn trees to hem in the reed bed. Their snow-white response to the season of growth contrasts with the reed mace, still struggling to find a colorful escape from winter. Last year's reed heads have lost most of their minute seeds, blown by the wind to fresh pastures or consumed by bearded tits in their struggle to survive the winter months. Throughout winter, the root system remained active, producing shoots beneath the water, but now the green stems thrust upward, bearing fresh flower heads. A time of change. New life is expected. The caterpillar of the drinker moth, so named because of its partiality to a drop of morning dew, is tempted to emerge from its winter lethargy by the increased warmth and longer hours of daylight. Both the drinker moth and the reed warbler share a common enemy. To the moth, a predator who can deal with its protective hairy coat. To the other, a parasite of relatively large proportions, the cuckoo. Reed warblers appear nervous at its presence. The reeds may offer dense protection for nesting birds, but the cuckoo will watch patiently for the moment to steal in and lay its own egg alongside those of the other bird. Despite the potential hazard, the reed warbler continues to collect nesting material. The deeply cupped nest is bound tightly to the reed stems by the female. She is encouraged by the male, his only offering towards construction. But later he will assist with the incubation of the eggs. She collects dry grasses and strips of dead reed, a task often involving lengthy journeys away from the reed bed. A shortcut is to steal from the nest of a neighboring bird, or perhaps from one of the makeshift nests that these birds have a habit of building, some say to confuse the cuckoo. The occupied nests are tightly woven and may even be reinforced with cobwebs. Four blotched eggs, and one of them could be a cuckoo's. For nearly 2 weeks, the male and the female reed warbler will share the incubation. Male bitterns boom from very early spring to July, the months that the females shoulder all the responsibilities of nest building, incubating, and rearing the young. Perhaps the resonant notes warn would-be intruders, "Keep out, this is my patch. Somewhere in here there's a female doing all the work." To satisfy the young bittern's hunger, the female goes off in search of small fish, an appetizing introduction to the variety of food available in the reed bed. Later the young will progress to eels, frogs, and toads, and possibly the young of moorhens or coot. Bitterns are secretive, untrusting birds, and it's difficult to work out their precise requirements for success. Some will fly as much as a mile from a reed bed to feed, whilst others may remain in the reeds and not establish breeding territories. At the turn of the century, the bittern was extinct as a breeding bird in Britain, but after natural recolonization from the continent, numbers climbed to almost 100 pairs, but more recently have declined to around 50. There seems to be no straightforward explanation for this, although natural succession to drier conditions may be a cause. Young bitterns come in all sizes, and therefore all strengths, because the female began incubating when she laid her first egg. There could easily be a week's difference between them, and such a discrepancy is revealed at moments like this. The first youngster to clamp itself like a vice onto the female's beak does so to stimulate her to regurgitate food from the crop. It may take a little time for her to be convinced that this is really what she wants to do. At least one of her young is satisfied, but there are other hungry mouths to be attended to. One factor in the breeding success of bitterns, and it's one that may prove to be highly critical, is the cleanliness of the low-lying water in the reed beds around them. Bitterns will breed only in areas where their food is plentiful, and if the reed beds cannot provide this vital need, then breeding numbers will continue to decline. The Royal Society for the Protection of Birds currently owns and manages reed beds supporting half the breeding bitterns in the British Isles. If levels of pollution are kept tolerably low and more clogged ditches are opened as fresh feeding grounds, it may still be possible for bitterns to survive in reasonable numbers. But due to the drainage of suitable habitat, their chances of reaching the high levels of a few hundred years ago are very slim. Early June, and the yellow iris adds a welcome splash of colour to the encroaching sea of green. Here at the dry edges where the reed is tainted by invading scrub plants, the female reed bunting approaches her young. The nest is tucked away close to the ground, where convolvulus is gaining a foothold. By mid-June, the yellow traces of last year's reeds have almost sunk beneath a wealth of new shoots. A European swallowtail butterfly, rare inhabitant of East Anglia, feeds on the nectar of marsh valerian. At the edge of its European range, this butterfly survives because of the milkweed, on which its caterpillars are totally dependent for food. There are other rarities in this borderland between reed bed and scrub. Where the damp-loving willow bursts into flower, Chetty's warblers have established themselves in the last 10 years or so. From its Mediterranean stronghold, the spread of this bird northwards at the turn of the century is one of the most remarkable ornithological events. Rival males vie for territorial rights, the calls of one answered by the vigorous tail flicking of another. Chetty's warblers first appeared in southern England in the late 1960s. They were breeding soon after, and are now established as year-long residents over much of the wet scrub and reedlands of the south. They've proved to be vigorous colonizers. By the end of June, the new reed is in full growth. It rises from the water like an impenetrable wall, slender columns giving shelter and concealment. The bearded tit spends much of its life in this dense forest, taking advantage of the abundant summer crop of insects and spiders. Possibly for the second time this season, it has young to feed, tucked well out of sight in their reed fabric nest. In late June and early July, a ready food supply appears. The caterpillar of the twin-spotted wainscot moth. The larvae have grown safely inside the reeds, eating the central pith until ready to pupate. Then, having burrowed out near the top of the stem, they crawl downwards and hide in the litter below. Those that make the journey this far will emerge as adults during August. Many are not so fortunate. They form an important addition to the diet of young bearded tits. By mid-July, blue carpets of marsh forget-me-not appear at the edge of the maturing reeds. And further in, 3 of the eggs in the reed warbler's nest were destined for an untimely end in the waters below, evicted by an earlier hatching stranger. The female cuckoo has made her mark, and now the adult reed warblers must work round the clock to satisfy the endless demands of their foster child. Their parental response to a begging mouth is too strong for them to abandon a monster, which to us is obviously not of their creation. But all is not lost for the reed warblers. They are particularly long-lived, and over the years they will continue to feed any occupants of their nests. When they avoid the eagle eyes of the female cuckoo, it will be their own young who embark on the late summer migration from the depths of the reed bed. By the time the cuckoo is able to fly, its real parents will have long departed for Africa. Somehow, almost miraculously, it will follow. Instinct guides it south to the equator. Late August finds the young bearded tits moving through the reeds. Theirs is a reed-bed existence through summer and winter, but an enforced change of diet lies ahead of them. The easily digested insects and spiders will not last much longer. At this time, the reeds begin to undergo internal changes. The sugar content moves back down to the rhizomes, and this, in turn, attracts vast numbers of the plum reed aphid. Their fine, piercing mouthparts penetrate the reed and siphon off the sweet sap. The aphids arrive in such large quantities that sedge warblers rely on them totally as a fat-building source, sustaining them on their unbroken migration to Africa. Purple heads are once again flush with minute seeds which will float away on the wind in their thousands. Most will perish, but just a few may settle, embryo-like, and take root. Tiny filaments of life striving to give birth to a new reed bed. But this has little to do with the future of the parent bed. It survives by virtue of its fast-spreading root system, already storing food to face the coming winter. The transition is abrupt. Green has once more become yellow, and now, in places, white, as the first snowflakes settle on the feathery traps held aloft. Summer visitors have gone, and only those birds with some inbuilt resistance to a temperate zone winter can survive here now. The newspaper of events is easily read in the snow. a bittern has passed by in search of open water in which to feed. If it is not available, it may die of starvation. Fortunately, this is a fate held in store during only the severest of winters. The birds that stay behind do so because they're adapted to survive the average conditions, those concerning temperature and food availability, that a reed bed existence imposes on them during the winter months. At its cruelest, starkest time, the beauty of a reed bed somehow seems to be heightened. Ice-free waters in the very heart of the reed bed attract wildfowl in large numbers. And despite the economy of life in winter, teal are undergoing the preliminaries of courtship. Shovelers, attracted by the teal, begin their descent, while creeping ice forces the hungry water rail out of its customary cover. In the heart of the reed bed, the bearded tit families have flocked together. With their insect food completely gone, or at least too well hidden for them to find, they harvest their share of the plentiful seeds that each reed head produces. The seeds are very small, and the birds must spend most of the limited hours of daylight hard at work. But man also has an interest in reeds. The traditional art of thatching requires certain areas of reed bed to be managed for this purpose alone. Commercial reed beds are cut and cleared every year or two to keep the growth straight and strong. Hardly any reed cutting takes place before early January, when the frost has killed the leaves and they've fallen to the ground, leaving the raw material of thatching standing in thick, accessible groves. These areas, solid underfoot and providing a high-quality plant free from litter at its base, are the reed cutter's ideal. By simple irrigation, the reed bed is kept damp enough to sustain its yearly growth, and the cutting removes the danger of scrub encroachment. But such areas are not ideal for the birds who nest and feed low down, where there is an accumulated litter from past years. There need not, however, be too much of a conflict between conservationist and cutter. Much of Britain's reed is confined to protected reserves, and it's managed in such a way as to keep it both ideal and more permanent for birds. The maintenance of our existing reed beds as permanent places for birds is a difficult task. The very nature of a reed bed is one of continuous change, the leading edge ploughing its way through open water, the trailing edge drying out and being taken over by advancing scrub. Halting such a powerful process in its tracks will be complicated and expensive. And yet, If we are to maintain valuable communities of wildlife, it must be attempted. Only then can we hope to ensure the survival of such rarities as the Marsh Harrier, a bird of delicate and graceful charm, whose continued existence depends almost entirely upon the future of our secret reeds.
Wingspan, 5 feet. Beak, 5 to 5.5 inches fully grown. One of the largest birds in Europe and one of the best-known water birds in the world. Weighs in at only 4 pounds, height 3 feet. The grey heron. And this is the story of one of them. Not this one. That was just to make sure we all know what we're talking about. That easily recognized silhouette, the bird likely to turn up in the wildest marsh or the tamest pond. The grey heron. It's cold, still winter. But a female heron, after months of lonely hunting, must go back to the ancestral home and find a mate. She calls. The male reacts. The male heron has also spent the winter alone, but has now picked himself a nesting territory from which to attract a female. This display is called bitterning, after that other marsh bird, the bittern. Herons are colonial nesters, so the female has several choices. They aren't overreacting to the Sex Equality Act, it's always been that way. And they choose the one that attracts them most. The choice made, the female's sudden approach evokes the more aggressive bow snap display. This would serve to ward off a male intruder if by any chance he'd made a mistake about the sex. Easy to do, even if you're a heron. But once accepted, the pair is formed and family life begins. Our story is about one heron called, forgive us, Big Bill. This is his mum and dad. Rooks are tolerated in a heronry, but it has been known for rooks and herons to fight to the death over the available space. A typical heronry would be a stand of trees close to water, and it might have been in use for hundreds of years. Dad goes, Mum stays. The brightness of her bill shows she's ready for mating. Dad might have gone to something called the standing ground, a sort of non-working men's club. leaving all this beauty behind. But the communal nature of the gatherings is said to stimulate the reproductive condition. So, don't worry, love. He'll be back. Dad didn't go to the standing ground. He went to the nearby fishing. Sneaked out for a quick one, sort of thing. Coot and teal. Herons, in spite of their eagerness to breed, are often interrupted by, say, severe frost, and a protracted spell of bad weather can affect the timing of events. If there are delays of up to 3 weeks, it can mean the young are in the nest until early September. And the concentration of herons near the heronry leads to great competition over food, especially if it's scarce. This heron has a fish, and like all herons, wants to eat it alone. But the other herons have other ideas. When food is scarce, coot and moorhen, even duck like teal and mallard, have been killed and eaten, though the heron sometimes chokes to death in the attempt. Dad hesitates, and so someone else gets the dropped fish. It is, as it so often is, a fight to survive. Herons are well adapted for life in a watery environment with their long neck and long legs. They have semi-binocular vision, whatever that is, the position of the eyes giving them the advantage of stereoscopic sight, and this meets the heron's requirements perfectly. It's even been suggested that the broken pattern of black and white feathers helps hide them from the fish. Good afternoon. Sir? Herons are like all fishermen. They prefer big fish. As soon as conditions improve, breeding can continue and building a nest is the first job. Both birds help with the building. As a general rule, the male collects the material and the female puts it together. However, here the female is collecting, so it's just possible Big Bill's father is a bit of a layabout. There's no shortage of nest material, as herons will take sticks and twigs from any old tree around, or someone else's nest. Big sticks of dead wood form the foundation, and thin, whippy twigs finish the nest off. It's lined with hair, feathers, rootlets, twigs, but herons can be great improvisers. One nest was found made entirely out of wire. Here's Dad, doing his bit. The heron's spindly anatomy has inspired some odd bits of folklore. For example, they say herons build a nest with 2 holes in the bottom, so they can sit with their legs dangling through. It's probably not true. When Dad arrives with his stick, there's a gentle moment of offering and acceptance. And the stick is added to the nest. The female spends the night roosting at the chosen nest site, and the male joins her at dawn, when nest building and mating take place. Not a lot of preliminaries to the latter, a sort of avian version of jumping from the mantelpiece. That's that then. Now, what did you say your name was? A few days after copulation, the first egg is laid, followed by one every 2 days. Once the first egg's laid, the bill reverts to its normal yellow color. But if the clutch is lost, the bill becomes pinkish and the birds display and mate again. This makes the heron's breeding season one of the longest of all British birds. A clutch is usually 3 to 5 eggs, but it can be as many as 10. You know what some people are like. And incubation starts with the laying of the first or second egg. This means that the young will be different ages when they hatch. Very important to herons, that is. Nests are sometimes used season after season and become a sort of tower block of subletting. Starlings and sparrows occupy the lower flats, with the herons, quite rightly, in the penthouse. Nests can weigh as much as half a hundredweight and measure 4 feet across. Some indeed can be so heavy they crash to the ground. Incubation is shared, the changeover, or nest relief, being a time of great excitement and mutual display, which strengthens the pair bond. They let out a long cry on changeover, and the relieving partner sometimes brings a ceremonial offering. The stints vary from 6 to 12 hours, the job being shared equally during the 25-day incubation. The male prefers the day shift, for some reason. The first eggs will hatch at the end of March, and most pairs will have young by early April. This is Dad, standing guard. For the first 10 days, the young are helpless. One or other of the adults will be on constant guard. When all the young here have hatched, there will be a difference of 6 days in the ages. The oldest is our Big Bill. Dominant, assertive, he uses his superior strength and weight to get more food. As they say, a good big un will always beat a good little un. If there's a shortage of food, the youngest just can't compete. Herons need privacy. They're very sensitive to disturbance. This can often lead to desertion, but can also be the cause of nests being left temporarily exposed to predators such as crows and jackdaws. More advanced young can be frightened away from a nest, and if they can't get back to it, they starve, as the parents will bring food only to the nest itself. They may even fall to the ground. And it's the disturbance of large young, just before they become competent flyers, that can cause serious mortality. Still, whatever man's influence, direct or indirect, losses from natural causes are much higher. Gales can be killers. For a growing family, this is not ours, by the way, the risks are enormous. The oldest young are again in the greatest danger, especially if they're stretching their wings. Again, it's only necessary for a young bird to be blown a few feet away from the nest. If it doesn't get back, it starves. If it falls, it dies. heron population in England and Wales fluctuates around 5,000 pairs. There have been annual counts of heron organised by the BTO since 1928, the longest continual survey of any wild bird in the world. We certainly count our herons. Most colonies average around 20 pairs, but the RSPB Reserve at Northwood Hill in Kent has about 180 pairs, the largest in Britain. Well, down our side. The large conspicuous nests are generally grouped together conveniently in small areas, making counting easy. The only problem being those nests which appear no larger than a rook's. Most trees contain only one nest, but in China, 60 nests have been counted in one tree. Of course, the density of herons is greater in Asia. Still, fiendishly clever. The size of a heronry depends to a great extent on the richness of the adjacent feeding ground. Super eaters need supermarkets, and it explains the heron's preference for estuaries and lowland river valleys. Each heron has a favorite fishing spot. With only 2 of our family left, it's still the survival of the fittest. And the fittest is definitely Big Bill. Food is regurgitated for the young, and competition can be violent. There's a lot of grabbing of bills, and a great deal of heavy soliciting. And as usual, the squeaky wheel gets the most grease. Dad returns, Mum calls. It takes as much as 7 hours to collect a complete meal for the young, and in the 2-month nesting period, 230 pounds of food finds its way to the treetop. About 500 grams per nestling every 24 hours. A lot of bullying goes on, and there are records of the oldest actually eating the youngest. Tune. Many of the young take to standing on the edge of the nest. The parents, almost as though they can't bear to watch, spend less time at home. The young have the necessary habit of exercising before flight is possible for them. They scramble round the nest, and this is the time when many crash or get blown to their death. If the heron's flight looks slow, even lumbering, it's misleading. They're actually very good at it and can fly long distances at 30 miles an hour. They mostly feed within about 5 miles of the heronry, but some have been known to fly 40 miles. With the onset of warmer weather, aquatic animals move from deep to shallow water, and the stickleback and minnows grow big enough to eat, thus providing a good food supply for the young when they leave the nest. Here, Dad takes a small fish. Just practicing, perhaps. Nothing small for our Big Bill. This roach is typical of the size parents provide for their young. Seeing this go down, it's easy to understand that 230 pounds is swallowed in 2 months. Imagine 230 pounds of cod. Feel better? After eating, the nearly grown birds stretch themselves in the sun. Adults sun themselves too, exposing as much wing area as possible. Perhaps they get a sort of heron tan. Anglers, a funny lot. For 200 years, it was believed that certain oils extracted from dead herons possessed properties attractive to fish. Fishermen were told to anoint their bait with the marrow cut out of a heron's thigh bone, being of great temptation to fishes. The fact that there is no marrow in a heron's thigh bone makes the theory a trifle flimsy. The heron's foot was thought to exude an oil or scent attractive to fish. Some fisherfolk on the Faroes still carry a heron's foot for luck. It was also suggested that a wading heron wriggles and waggles its toes as a fishing aid. Fortunately for today's herons, anglers no longer covet their thigh bones, and as though in celebration, this heron demonstrates it needs no oils or scents or toe waggling. After a period of 7 to 8 weeks from hatching, the young are on the point of leaving the nest. They clamber and flap around in the branches, and are called, none too originally, branches. Soon our young will have to fend for themselves. They've made it through the growing up dangers, now they've got to face the outside world. After half a year of activity, the wood is quiet and still and empty. A hatchery and a heron. Our heron, Big Bill. Hatcheries don't like herons, which is funny because herons speak very highly of hatcheries. It's over the preservation of fish that the clash between man and heron occurs. If the heron would leave the fish alone, man would leave the heron alone. But then the heron wouldn't be a heron, and the man wouldn't be a man. So, heron are regarded as vermin in trout fishing areas, and many are shot. Nevertheless, Bill has a go. Herons were once highly esteemed as food, even royal food. Nowadays, we prefer rainbow trout, and Big Bill isn't arguing. The trouble is, they won't stay still. Rotters. Big Bill tries somewhere else. He's not yet very experienced. He's got a lot to learn. Every noise excites him. But every noise is not food. not by a long leap. So he had to practice on something which holds still at any rate. Or maybe he's heard that old marrowbone story. Or the one about the African umbrella bird. The survival rate of young herons is not high. Big Bill has good ears, and he hears something. The fox is no enemy, but you can't be too careful. In fact, Bill's only enemy is man, and the things man does. Man disturbs the heron, and the heron doesn't like to be disturbed. In fact, not many fishermen like to be disturbed. Man creates pollution, and the heron comes in for the worst of it, being at the end of a food chain. If there's anything that can poison birds, the heron's got it. 20th century saying. Because of various poisons, herons can die, and they can't breed as well either. Ponds are removed, ditches drained, frogs, a source of food, are scarce. What self-respecting frog would live here? Fortunately, herons will eat almost anything, and Bill is now a year older and a year wiser. He eats fish up to 3 pounds in weight, crabs, prawns, small birds, grasshoppers, mice, mammals up to stoat size, coot, moorhen, lots of water voles, duck, rats, even cats, plus a little vegetation for pellet formation. But one of the heron's favorite foods is eel. Herons probably eat more eels than all other species of fish put together. Contrary to popular belief, it doesn't stab, it grabs. Herons have slight serrations on the edges of the mandibles, which give a firm hold. This is a pretty big eel, and singularly uncooperative. Heron's digestion is especially adapted to eels, because eels contain more fat than any other freshwater fish. They're also very slimy, and the heron's plumage condition is important. To remove the slime, they use a combination of powder down and a pectinated claw. That's a sort of comb with serrated edges on one of their toes. Herons usually kill their prey before swallowing it, but it doesn't look as though Bill's going to manage that this time. There is, in folklore, a story which says that eels eaten alive pass straight through the heron and out again. So they were said to stand with their hindquarters pressed against a rock to prevent this wastage of effort. Better back up, Bill. After that struggle, Bill pauses to remember the good old days when he was younger and meals were easier to come by. Goldfish in garden ponds provide an increasing supply of food. That is, for herons able to adapt to the idea of being close to man. Unfortunately for Bill, some people don't like having their goldfish eaten. Bill finds a quieter garden. If you really want to protect your goldfish, stretch a few thin wires around the edges of the pond. That's all. After the good times, come the bad times. Severe weather kills herons, particularly the young. They're inexperienced and in competition with adult birds, and over half of them die the first winter. Continental herons migrate, but British ones generally stay, and this touch of the stiff upper mandible can lead to starvation if food is scarce. Bill needs only a pound of food a day, but that's something like 5 roach, or 14 eels, or 3 water voles, or 1.5 moorhens. And you know how tricky it is to find half a moorhen. There's just not enough food to go round. Britain's 25,000 herons need 25,000 pounds of food. That's nearly 12 tons, and that's every day. Of course, actual mortality depends on the severity and length of winter. In 1962-63, the population was cut almost in half. Over 10,000 herons dead. So, fishermen, if you're about to go for your guns, remember, the heron has quite a lot to cope with, as it is. For Bill, like all birds, finding a meal and a mate means the difference between life and death. Herons have been around for millions of years, and it's lucky for us that a few survived to return to their ancestral nesting sites to breed more little bills, to discomfort the eels, and to give us, albeit at a distance, their grey but colourful company.